Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Today we're taking a close look at a situation that's been developing pretty rapidly in Los Angeles. We're talking protests, federal immigration actions, and significantly, the deployment of the U.S. National Guard.
Yeah, and for this specific deep dive, we're really focusing our lens. We're looking at these events pretty much exclusively through what's reported in one source, an article from Alazer dated June 8th, 2025.
Exactly. So our mission here is to unpack what this particular article presents.
Yeah.
The key events it describes, the different viewpoints it includes, the context, the reactions. Just trying to give you a clear picture based on this source without getting bogged down.
Okay, sounds good. So where do we start? The article sets the scene on Sunday, June 8th.
Right. What's the picture it paints?
Well, it describes downtown L.A. and the very visible presence of National Guard troops right there on the street.
And not just standing there, right? The article talks about police actions near the Metropolitan Detention Center.
Yeah, definitely active. It reports police firing tear gas at demonstrators and making arrests nearby.
And Al Jazeera's own correspondent, Rob Reynolds, he was reportedly there.
He was. And the piece mentions his observations, seeing specific things like tear gas canisters being used, percussion grenades.
Those are the really loud ones designed to disorient.
Exactly. Those, and also non-lethal baton rounds were reportedly deployed. It sounds like, well, standard crowd control stuff, but deployed.
And the atmosphere, the article mentions physical interactions.
It does. It reports pushing and shoving breaking out when demonstrators actually approach the line of guard troops. So, tension.
Okay. And the guard themselves, how were they described?
Dozens of them, according to the article. In riot gear, behind those plastic shields, basically stationed outside this federal building.
But here's an interesting observation the source includes from the correspondent again.
Yeah, Reynolds reportedly noted that while the guard members themselves weren't, actively confronting people physically at that moment, their sheer presence, just being there, was reported to have really enraged some of the people in L.A. Some Angelinos seemed, well, determined to make their feelings known. Quite dramatically, it says.
Okay, so that's Sunday, but the article makes it clear this wasn't out of the blue.
Not at all. It connects these Sunday events directly back to some pretty intense confrontations the night before, on Saturday.
And where were those happening?
The source points specifically to clashes near a Department of Homeland Security facility. This was in Paramount, that's a city south of L.A. Notes it has a large Latino population.
Got it. And what kicked all this off? What was the trigger, according to Al Jazeera?
The article points to federal authorities carrying out mass arrests. These happened apparently in several locations over the past week leading up to this.
Any examples given?
Yeah, they mentioned the city's fashion district and also a Home Depot store as locations for these raids.
Wow. And do they give a sense of scale? How many people?
The source cites immigration officials saying reportedly more than 100 people were detained just over that past week.
Okay, so you have these federal raids, then protests erupting, things get intense, and then comes the federal response reported in the article.
Which was President Donald Trump deploying 2,000 U.S. National Guard soldiers into Los Angeles.
And the way this happened is a big focus in the article, right? It calls it unusual.
Very much so. That's a key point they highlight. The article states pretty clearly that Trump went around the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, didn't get his request.
How did he do that, legally speaking? Does the source say?
It does. It specifies the reported legal basis Trump used. Apparently, it's a different provision of the law, one that allows the president to nationalize the state National Guard.
Meaning bring it under federal command?
Exactly. Federal command. And the justification cited was cases of insurrection against the United States government. That specific phrase is used.
Okay, insurrection. That's strong language.
It is. And the source really contrasts this with the normal procedure.
Which is usually?
Usually, the state governor has to request the Guard's presence. So using this specific provision, it effectively bypasses that state-level authority.
And, well, as you might expect, this move, described as controversial, leads straight into another major theme in the article, the really different ways people are seeing this whole thing.
Absolutely. Huge difference in perspectives presented. Let's start with President Trump's stance, as laid out in the article.
What did the source report there?
Well, it quotes him justifying potential deployments, saying things like, "We will have troops everywhere." And as I apparently added that more cities could see deployments if protests spread, quoted directly saying, "We're not going to let this country be torn apart."
Did it mention his criteria? Like for using even more force, maybe active duty military?
Yes, it reports on that. It quotes him regarding the potential use of active duty Marines, mentioning they were on high alert. Trump reportedly said the bar is what I think it is.
Hmm.
And if we see danger to our country and our citizens, we will be very strong in terms of law and order.
Yeah.
That's the quote provided.
And how did he describe the actual events, the people protesting, according to the source?
The language reported is specific. Things like attacking our federal agents, calling the events migrant riots, and framing the situation as a form of rebellion.
Migrant riots, that term appears multiple times.
It does. The article also mentions him directing his cabinet via Truth Social to take all necessary action to stop these, quote, migrant riots.
And there's another direct quote from Truth Social included.
A very striking one, yeah. The article quotes, "Order will be restored, the illegals will be expelled, and Los Angeles will be set free."
Okay. Powerful words reported there. Now let's flip to the other side presented in the source. Governor Gavin Newsom.
Right. The article says California's Democratic leadership, including Newsom, issued a, quote, sharp rebuke.
What was Newsom's message to residents, as reported?
He was quoted urging people to stay peaceful, telling them quite directly, don't give Donald Trump what he wants, and also speak up, stay calm, do not use violence and respect law enforcement.
And his view on Trump's decision to send the Guard.
He reportedly called it inflammatory, warned it would just make the situation more combustible, more dangerous.
Did he suggest a motive behind the federal actions?
The article quotes him accusing the administration of using, well, heavy-handed tactics quite deliberately. The idea being, according to this quote, to provoke unrest and distract from their immigration agenda. He reportedly said, they want a spectacle, don't give them one.
So two very, very different narratives there. Does the article include any other voices, other perspectives on the federal actions?
It does. It brings in Alexandra Miller, identified as an immigration justice attorney with an organization called Vicina.
And her take.
She's quoted describing the ICE raids, the initial trigger, as incredibly concerning, saying they lead to, fear within local communities.
Did she offer an opinion on the intent behind the raids?
Yes, the article reports her belief that the raids are intended as a massive public fear tactic. She acknowledges the government has authority, but feels the way it's being handled is, quote, disproportionate to the needs and priorities.
And anyone else quoted?
Senator Bernie Sanders is mentioned. The article quotes him saying, Trump's order to federalize the Guard captured a president moving this country rapidly into authoritarianism and also usurping the powers of the United States Congress.
And to provide some balance, did the source mention support for the president's actions?
Yes, it briefly notes that several Republican leaders voiced support for involving the National Guard. Doesn't detail who or what they said, but notes the support existed.
Okay, let's maybe circle back to the specific incidents the article describes, especially from Saturday night's confrontations. What details does it give?
It paints a picture of escalating clashes,
Mm-hmm.
reports of federal agents firing tear gas, stun grenades, those disorientation devices again, and also pepper balls.
And the protesters' response, according to the source.
Reported as responding with rocks and debris. And it also mentions fires burning in the streets.
Yeah.
So a pretty chaotic scene described.
Does it pinpoint any other locations besides Paramount where things were happening?
It mentions Compton, noting a vehicle was set alight there on Saturday. And Paramount again, saying hundreds rallied and police put up barbed wire barriers. Also notes crowds returned to federal buildings in central L.A.
And there is that mention of the Marines being on alert.
Yeah, the source includes a warning attributed to the U.S. Defense Secretary, P. Hegseth, stating that active duty Marines based nearby at Camp Pendleton were on high alert, and, crucially, that they could be mobilized if the unrest continued. So the article suggests potential for further escalation.
Wow, okay. And finally, the article puts this into a bit of historical context.
Just briefly, it notes that the last time the National Guard was deployed in Los Angeles itself was back in 1992, during the riots following the Rodney King verdict.
Right. Significant comparison point.
Definitely adds weight to the current situation, as presented in the source.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. We've gone through the Al Jazeera article's account. What's the overall picture it gives you, the listener?
Well, pulling it all together from this one source, you get a snapshot of a really tense moment in L.A. You see the scene on the ground, the Guard's presence, you understand the reported trigger of these federal immigration raids. Then there's the federal response, this controversial Guard deployment bypassing the governor.
And maybe most importantly, these clashing narratives.
Exactly. The wildly different ways key figures, according to the article, are framing the situation, reacting to it, from insurrection and riots on one side to inflammatory tactics and disproportionate response on the other.
So the article, based on our deep dive here, portrays this cycle. Federal enforcement actions sparking protests, which are met with a significant and reportedly unusual federal show of force. This, in turn, ignites major political debate, condemnation from some, support from others.
Yeah, and that really brings us to maybe the core takeaway from analyzing this specific source and something for you to think about. It's about those conflicting narratives themselves.
Okay. How the story is being told.
Precisely. How do these fundamentally different characterizations laid out in the Al Jazeera piece shape how we understand what's happening? Is it helpful to see it through the lens of insurrection requiring federal order, as the president reportedly framed it? Or is it more accurately seen, as critics quoted in the article suggest, as the outcome of inflammatory government actions, maybe an overly disproportionate approach to enforcement?
Those contrasting frames, insurrection versus provocation, order versus overreach, presented side by side in the source, that's really something to consider, how that framing itself influences perception and maybe even what happens next.
Definitely something to chew on as you process this information from this specific report.